This is The Elder Scrolls Online. We're on Xbox One X. It is indeed enhanced. We're getting it pushed towards a 4K resolution with HDR support. For this review, we're doing something a little bit differently. I'm joined by
Joelle?
and this is our Elder Scrolls Online expert, as to say, or experienced player, and we're just going to be kind of talking about the game and going over features and everything like that. So, just to open our discussion a little bit, I thought we'd talk a bit about the story for those starting fresh, the narrative structure of the game, generally all of the content in regards to the actual quests, maybe some of the side quests, from a newer player's perspective, or maybe even experienced player coming back in, minus the concepts of the DLC content at this point.
So ESO, it takes place during the Second Era, which is roughly 1,000 years before Skyrim, for those of you who have played Skyrim, and it encompasses all of Tamriel. Some of the zones haven't been fully developed yet, so they're still blacked out, but they may be released as future DLC chapters. The main quest line from ESO focuses on the Daedric Prince Molag Bal, and he has this big evil plot to pull Tamriel into oblivion. When you start the game, you, the player, are the vestige. And basically, you have been captured by Molag Bal. He's stolen your soul and imprisoned you in his realm in Oblivion, which is known as Cold Harbor. In prison, you're contacted by a man who's known as the Prophet. He tells you that you have an important role to play in stopping Molag Bal's evil scheme. And then Lyris Titanborn comes along. She is going to be your first companion and a big part of the story later on, and she is there to help you escape from prison. Then you help the Prophet escape from Cold Harbor and return to Tamriel. So all of this happens in the tutorial area, so you learn how to do basic combat, how to loot items and all that stuff, as well as get a little bit of the story, which is fun. When you return to Tamriel, the Prophet will continue to enlist your help as you attempt to prevent Molag Bal and his minions from pulling Tamriel into Cold Harbor. As you level from level 1 to 50, you will continue to do more quests based on this main quest line. But in order to level, you have to go and do some other quests, which are just based on the zone you're in. More about Molag Bal, though, is he has these dark anchors that appear throughout Tamriel, and they're a big part of the game. And these dark anchors are Molag Bal's way of pulling Tamriel towards Cold Harbor, weakening the gap between Nirn and Oblivion. So when these dark anchors appear, what you get to do is you get to fight Molag Bal's Daedric forces, destroy the anchor, and you get some nice loot out of it. As well as there's some achievements for defeating all of the dark anchors in each zone. And basically, after you escape Cold Harbor, you begin your questing and your adventure in one of the 3 Alliance starting zones. The 3 Alliance starting zones are the Aldemary Dominion, the Daggerfall Covenant, and the Ebonheart Pact, and those come into play later on in the game as well.
So with the quest structuring, there's main quests and obviously a lot of side ones. How do you end up doing these quests? Do you just wander around? Are you forced along a line? Is it linear or more open?
It is definitely more open. It actually can be very challenging to follow some of the quest lines, especially if you're picking up multiple quests at once. But generally, the zone quests are linear, so if you start in the Aldemary Dominion, you get a little starting zone. It's in Knarthi's Roost, and then you go to Aradon and then Gratwood, and each of these zones have its own main quest line as well as several side quest lines. The side quest lines can be, small things like doing favors for the people around that zone. They're definitely not necessary, but they can be a lot of fun. Sometimes there's, murder mysteries, or you have to go into these dungeons.
So you say they mix the quest lines up quite a bit.
Yes, the quest lines are mixed up quite a bit, but the synopsis, I guess, of the main quest line that I gave there just a few minutes ago, that it progresses as you level up. So once you hit, for example, level 15, the Prophet will contact you, and you go and talk to him, and you can continue on with that story.
So with the story element, how about we dive into the alliance zones? I've heard those are interesting.
Yeah, so there's three different alliances. There is the Aldemary Dominion, which is led by Queen Irene, and it is composed of the High Elves, the Wood Elves, and the Khajiit. Then we have the Daggerfall Covenant, which is led by King Emmerich, and it's composed of Bretons, Orcs, and the Red Guards. And lastly, we have the Ebonheart Pact, led by King Norin, composed of the Nord's Dark Elves and Argonians. So when you're creating a character, when you're starting out in Elder Scrolls Online, part of what you choose is what race you want to be, and the race is locked to the Alliance unless you get a feature that unlocks it. So basically, if you want to be a High Elf, for example, you're going to be starting out in the Aldemary Dominion, and that is going to be your main storyline for the first playthrough.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, with the aspect of alliances and the story, talk a little bit about the DLC now, the expansions, and the extra content. You just want to kind of go over what those provide, like new areas, new creatures, new quests. What do you get when you jump into these expansions? And do you want to highlight one or two?
So with the DLC, you have smaller DLC content, so things just like smaller areas that are unlocked available to you, as well as skill lines. So a DLC content, for example, would be the Dark Brotherhood, as well as the Thieves Guild. So that unlocks an entire other quest line related to that, as well as special zones related. DLC also includes some chapters. So, for example, Somerset is a full chapter, Elsewhere is a full chapter, and Greymore are a full chapter. So these are much bigger DLC drops where you have an entire zone dedicated to it. You get, I think, usually a couple dungeons, some trials that are unlocked, as well as it just really expands what's happening in the base game.
Okay, so with those, I also understand there's a bit of a lead up to these larger scale events that happen almost yearly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say pretty much yearly. Whenever a new chapter drops, there's a big lead up. It drops a whole bunch of new content. There's a prologue quest that happens prior to you entering this new zone. So I think the chapters that have been released so far are Morrowind was the first one, and then we had Somerset was next, then Elsewhere, and then just recently Greymore has dropped.
So I think at this point it's good to talk about the visuals and everything like that. So we're both playing on the Xbox One X, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have to say, in my opinion, from playing a fair bit of it on the platform and everything like that, because we did some matches and some dungeons and stuff, it's actually fairly impressive in terms of the visuals. You get a good rendering distance, fairly steady performance I've noticed across where I was playing, and it's got some neat different biomes and aesthetics. But you want to talk a bit about the visuals across your many adventures?
I can't really talk about the technicalities of the visuals and how things render, but in terms of just visual appeal, it is a very beautiful game. And the really cool thing about it is each zone is so different in how it looks. You have Somerset, which is where the High Elves are from, and they have these gorgeous trees that are just vibrant colors. And then there's Morrowind, for example, which is there's lots of volcanoes and lava, and there's fungus growing everywhere. And then you have some major cities that are great. You see like different types of architecture depending on the zone you're in. And there's so many different styles. So like the Red Guard style is so different than, the Nord style, for example, because they're in different areas and they have, different lives and they live in different environments.
So with that, we do have a bit of a day-night cycle and everything, right? The world sort of goes along as you do.
Yeah, the day-night cycle, I find it's not, it doesn't contribute as much to the game in terms of quests especially. and I find that days are a lot longer than you think.
Yeah, the seemingly never-ending days and short little nights. It sounds like a lot of people like it, though. In most
Yeah, no,
games.
it's definitely nice. I find that when I'm questing, and I prefer to quest during the daytime. There is no way, to my knowledge, to like skip hours in a day. Um,
Yeah, you're probably pretty locked to the general world that you're
yeah,
visiting
you're
in
pretty locked to the
MMORPG.
general world. Going when you're traveling around at nighttime, though, farming for resources, so finding like alchemy ingredients and woods and like clothing material. I find doing that at night can be helpful because when you put in a passive skill, those materials will glow. So when it's dark, they
Okay.
just pop right up. So farming materials at night can be very advantageous.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So for those coming off of the more single-player Elder Scrolls, the Skyrim and the like of the series, what's different from that experience into this?
Well, there's quite a few different things about doing an MMO ORPG.
Mm-hmm.
The big difference is there are other players everywhere, and that can be a little bit of a shock when you're going from a single player game to a multiplayer game. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that you can do as a solo player. So if you really enjoy that solo play style, there's lots you can do. Tons of quests that you can go along and do. Some of the content is purely solo content, so you do have to do it on your own. And if you're coming off of a game like Skyrim, it's really great, especially if you're into like the Elder Scrolls lore, because it gives you just more world to explore.
Oh yes, and a bit of a growing world too, right? Because it's
Yes,
continuously.
it's a very much a growing world. There's still some areas of Tamriel that are blacked out and will probably be released in future expansions and DLC.
Yeah, it should be exciting. So let's talk about the travel options because this is a pretty big world. How do people get around?
So how you get around in Elder Scrolls Online is by way shrines. So it's not like Skyrim where you can just open up your map and travel to wherever you want. There are set points throughout the world that you can travel to, and these are way shrines. Usually there's, depending on how large the zone is, there might be like 8 to 10 way shrines in a little province. Or not little, but in a province.
Yeah.
And to travel to a way shrine, you can go to one way shrine and then travel to another way shrine in a totally other province. Or you can open up your map and recall it a way shrine, but it does cost gold, so that's the one downside of doing that.
Okay, but you can also travel, in game by things like foot and horse and
Oh yeah, no, for sure. You can run around as much as you want. Mounts are pretty crucial to the game because the world is so big. So you get your first horse when you get to level 10, so that's a really, really big goal to reach if you're a new player, so look forward to that. And once you get your mount, you want to make sure that you're upgrading your mount speed. It just helps with traveling faster, and you do that by going to a stable master. And then mounts are really fun because you can collect a whole bunch of different ones. I have a leopard, for example, and I really like that mount.
yeah.
Yeah, so mounts you can collect, and they help you travel around a little bit faster. You can also run by foot. And then, yeah, way shrines is the other major way to travel.
And I also believe if you're in a group, I guess we should also talk about groups a little bit and how that works. But you can fast travel to your
Yeah,
team.
so if you're in a group, you can fast travel to any person in your group. And group play is also a big part of the game. If you're doing just like running around the world bosses are more group events. You can do them solo, but they can be very challenging. If you're a new player, a lot of even intermediate players have a hard time doing world bosses. So having a group to do world bosses is definitely advantageous, as well as public dungeons. They can be a little bit tricky by yourself, but by no means you have to do them in a group.
Mhm.
Group dungeons, however, unless you are a more veteran player, you would have to do that in a group. And in group dungeons, it's the PvE content, so player versus environment. In your group, you would have a tank, 2 damage dealers, and a healer. And there's a little story that goes along with each dungeon, and there's dungeons in all sorts of different zones that you can go to. 4 dungeons, you can travel directly into the dungeon, but you can also queue using Activity Finder, which is a nice system to use.
No, very helpful for finding others. So I guess moving on with that, we should talk a little bit about, because you mentioned some of them right there. Oh, what are the types of classes, and what are your thoughts? Do you have a favorite class? And can we talk a little bit about the customization once you do get your class going?
Yeah, so when you're creating your character, you create it either a damage dealer, a tank, or a healer. You can switch what you want to do. If you change your mind, that's totally fine. There are ways to redistribute your attribute points to become more tanky or more of a DPS or more of a healer, as well as switch your skills around if you change your mind. But with those kind of roles, there's 6 classes right now that you can choose from. There's the Dragon Knight, the Nightblade, Sorcerer, Templar, Necromancer, and Warden. So Warden is available through purchase with crowns, so that's an in-game purchase. So that's not available if you're a brand new player, unfortunately. And Necromancer is available only if you have elsewhere. But the other 4 are the 4 standard ones, and they're really fun to play. Dragon Knight is a great tanking class. They have good sustainability, nice heals, good shields, so they're really great tanks, but they can also be good damage dealers as well. The great thing about ESO is you can choose any class and be any role. Some are easier to do with certain roles, but again, it's whatever you want to do. So if you want to be a Khajiit Dragon Knight healer, you can do that. You know, like, it's possible. It's not great for endgame content, but it is possible. Nightblade is another fun class. They're more of the stealth. So if you like assassination and thieving and stuff, Nightblade's a fun class to play. Sorcerer is just straight up great magic class. They can be very powerful in PvP and PvE, and Templars are the best in slot healers at the moment, and they're fantastic. Great, lots of healing abilities, great sustain, all that good stuff.
Great, so that sounds pretty interesting and quite in depth in regards to touching on little things there. So I guess it would be good to kind of, when we've talked about this a little bit, the partying system, aka grouping, character leveling, how the guilding works, factions, kind of how you interact with others.
Yeah, so they do have a guild system, and you're allowed to be part of up to 5 guilds, which is pretty awesome. Getting into a guild can be a little bit tricky sometimes, but also can be really easy. There's a chat for players to use, and zone chat is available for everybody. A lot of times people will just put their guild in the zone chat, and if people find the description interesting, they'll join. There's trading guilds, which focus on more of the trading aspect of the game. There's guilds that focus on endgame content, and then there's social guilds, who are just people who like to play the game, who run a few dungeons, but just like to hang out. And you can also create your own guild if you want. There is no restriction on who and who can't create guilds, which is really cool. But you also don't need to be in a guild to do group content. So Activity Finder is really great because you can say what your role is and then queue for a dungeon, and it'll randomly choose other people who are online and stick you in a dungeon with them, which can be super cool. You can meet some nice people. You also don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. There's, no requirement to do that. And you can run through dungeons. I've run through dungeons with tons of people, and I've met some people through dungeons, and they're pretty cool, and, other people I've never talked to again, so.
Yeah, that's how it goes sometimes in these. So, how
Yeah.
would you say is, the most efficient way or general way that you level up characters? How does that system work?
So the best way to level up characters would be to go partially do quests, but also do things like world events such as world bosses, dolmens, and dungeons as well. So the group dungeons are really great ways to level up your character. Um, there's a daily dungeon reward, which gives you a lot of XP. So if you queue for a random normal daily dungeon through the activity finder, you'll get in, you'll do your dungeon, and you get a whole bunch of XP as well as some other rewards, which is quite nice.
Great. So I think it's time we talked about the end game content. So we've briefly touched on dungeons, but I know there's, raiding and PvP. Tell us a bit about what you can do there.
Yeah, so trials are 12-person type content. So usually you have 2 tanks, 2 healers, and 8 DPS. Sometimes you fiddle around with those numbers depending on what it is. And those are just dungeons, but dungeons on crack, essentially.
Yeah.
Or more similar to raids, such as in WoW. And with those, there's a story behind them. They're in different zones. And they can be a lot of fun too. It's, in my experience, I'm not great with trials yet, but it is a lot of fun. It's just a lot going on at once.
Yeah, some crazy action. So,
Crazy action. Yeah.
yeah. So how does the PvP factor in?
So PvP is kind of like its own category of things. So generally, if you're creating a character, you create a character to do PvE content or PvP content. There is a little bit of crossplay between the two, but if you're getting into more endgame content and you want to be have like the meta build and whatnot, generally you kind of have to designate your character for one of the two types of play styles. PvP, what ESO has is Cyrodiil, and Cyrodiil is where the 3 alliances are fighting for control of the Ruby Throne. So whatever alliance you decided on at the beginning of the game, when you enter Cyrodiil, that is the alliance you'll be fighting for. In Cyrodiil, there are keeps to capture, there are Elder Scrolls to get, and then there's resources as well around the different keeps that you can also capture. As well, in PvP, there's battlegrounds, which are, I like to think of them as little mini games, but they can be quite fun and they can help you work on building your PvP skill. And there's 3 groups, each with 4 people in each group. Again, they are randomly assigned, similar to how Dungeon Finder works and Activity Finder. And there's games such as Deathmatch, which is just standard kill as many people as you can and try to stay alive. And then there's Capture the Relic, which is very similar to Capture the Flag. There's one called Chaos Ball. What else is there? There's a few of them.
Just
They're
a
quite fun.
large list of PvP options.
Yeah, large list. Domination, where you have to run around and there's flags that you have to go and maintain control on. So yeah, lots of PvP stuff to do, lots of, PvE stuff to do, and lots of solo stuff to do, which I think is why ESO is so great, is because there is so much content and there's different play styles, and you can try it all if you want.
That is true. It does seem to offer quite a bit. So we talked a bit about expansions. What are your thoughts on the extra microtransactions? I know there's crowns. Let's just touch upon this briefly.
Yeah, so crowns are available for purchase. I believe when you first get an account, they might give you a lump sum of crowns, as well as if you have an ESO Plus membership, you'll get some crowns every time your ESO Plus membership reviews. And you can buy different things with them. I mentioned the Warden class earlier. That's something you can buy with crowns. You can also buy more cosmetic things. You can buy non-combat pets or mounts or crown crates, which will give you just a variety of different things, whether it be like collectibles or potions, stuff like that.
Cool. So I think leading into the next part kind of helps a lot. So we talked about pets, but there's also other gameplay extras, such as like housing. What's in the game along those lines of little extra things you can do or get?
Yeah, so you can buy a house. When you first play, you can there's a little quest you can do, and they'll give you an apartment for free. It's a really tiny room, but you can decorate it. A lot of the more veteran players or people who are more interested in that kind of stuff, you can buy houses. There's small houses, medium houses, large houses, and then there's mansions, which are really cool. And a lot of guilds will have like a mansion, and that'll be their guild hall. So they'll put crafting tables or merchants or just decorate it however they want, and then guild members can go and use them. So with that, there's furnishing that you can find throughout the world. There's designs that you can pick up, and when you learn them, you're able to craft furnishing items. Yeah, housing, it can be really cool. It can be very expensive, so definitely if you're new to the game, it's usually not your first priority, but as you play a little bit more, if it's something you're interested in, it can be a lot of fun. You can decorate your house however you want, and the decorating is actually quite nice in terms of you can place items wherever you want. I know in Skyrim, for example, when they added the housing side of things, moving stuff was a lot harder. ESO, it's a breeze. You just click, put it where you want. You can rotate it in 3 directions, which is nice.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's housing. Other extra things, we have non-combat pets, which can be really cool. You can collect them in a variety of different ways. You get them through doing quests or through the Crown Store. Then you also have your character appearance. So you can have costumes. You can dye your costumes different things. You can collect costumes from doing quests. There are also body markings and skins available, and again, you can collect these things through a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's through quests, sometimes it's through completing dungeons. Vet dungeons in particular, if you complete a vet dungeon and you do no death, a speed run, and a hard mode, they have skins for those dungeons, and they can be really cool. I know there's a crystal one that's really, really neat, and I would like to get at some point.
Yeah. Just little things to play after, little rewards, which are always nice in, MMORPGs. So with that, before we get to the last summary here, what do you like about the game? What would you like to see changed? Is this something you think new players can jump into at this point?
I think it's a great game for new players. I think it can be a little intimidating just because of how much content there is. But there's lots of players out there that are willing to help out. And if you find a guild that's geared towards newer players, that can be super helpful as well. I really enjoy that. I enjoy doing solo. I enjoy doing PvE. I enjoy doing PvP. So I think it's great that there's just a lot of versatility in the game. One thing that I would like to see change, and I don't know if it's ever going to change, is when you're doing group dungeons, sometimes people will queue for the incorrect roles. This is a personal pet peeve of mine. I know some people are like, whatever, it's fine, but for example, if you're a DPS and you queue as a tank, it can be really challenging to get through a dungeon when you don't have someone who's able to take a lot of the heat from those big bosses. So if you are a newer player, I would recommend queuing for the correct role. It makes it a lot easier, and that way you don't get any hate, because sometimes that does happen. But generally, the ESO community is very friendly, very willing to teach and help out. And if you are a newer player and you're not interested in the, MMO experience, there's still a lot of stuff you can do in terms of, questing, learning more about the lore. It can be a lot of fun as a solo player as well.
Great. So now we just go into a little bit of a summary here overall what we talked about. So this is obviously MMORPG, like we've mentioned numerous times. It's a large-scale experience that really does dive deep into the lore of the Elder Scrolls Online. There's options for PvE, PvP, grouping, playing alone. Just generally, it's got a ton of content to it, and it seems to expand over time. Is there anything else you'd like to quickly summarize here or end off with?
I think you got it pretty well. The one thing I will add, and this has to do with more of the microtransactions, is if the ESO Plus membership, I think I mentioned it earlier, it can be a really good thing to invest some money into, because it gives you access to a craft bag, all the DLC content, and again, it gives you a lump sum of crowns. So if you find you're really enjoying the game, definitely worth checking into. Because it makes the game a lot easier, because you do have that craft bag, makes crafting way easier, as well as you get all the DLC content, so Dark Brotherhood, Thieves Guild, as well as Murkmire, all those kind of things, which can be super fun. But yeah, I'd say give it a try. There's lots of content. By no means do you have to be hardcore about it. Just go and enjoy yourself.
Great, thank you for chatting.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.